Welcome to Lou's CIS Demos. Today we're going to do an install of Backtrack using Windows 10 Hypervisor as our host OS, and then using the guest will be our Kali. So we'll click on Start, start typing our Hypervisor Manager. There we go. Some just quick fundamentals. So here from our desk, we're going to go to New, Virtual Machine, and we're going to hit Next. We're going to give it our name. So I'm going to call this my pen testing box. And then here, if we choose this would change the location and where the actual VM will reside in. So if for some reason you want to put on a second disk, maybe you have a faster drive or a slower drive, or you don't have, maybe your boot OS by default C is not large enough to store these files, you may want to change that setting. So I'm going to go with the default for now. Here we can do two generations. You have generation 1, generation 2. You can read the difference right there. The difference is mainly you have the new updated files, and that's the main difference between the two that I know of currently. Here we can set up how much RAM. So the important part is to know how much RAM you have in your system. So if you have a system with 2 gigs, you don't want to give it 2 gigs. You don't want to give the virtual 2 gigs. So always want to leave yourself at least a minimum, a little over a gig and a half is what I normally recommend to people. So make sure you know how much RAM you have in your machine. So in my case, I'm going to go 248 and then hit Next. And then we want to connect this. So by default, there's a default switch. So we're going to use that. And then hit Next. So here, it's just going to show us the virtual disk. Here's the virtual disk name. Here's where it's located. Here it's just telling us the max volume size that it can be, or that's the volume size it's going to be. And then we can go larger to it. So we're going to hit Next. Here we can install the operating system or mount an ISO. So if we have the physical media, we would choose here, or if we have an image of a CD, which is a .ISO, then from there you're going to navigate to that spot. So typically I like to have mine off the root with a folder called .ISO, and then just have a list of ISOs. So right now I only have one currently configured. Then we're going to hit Next, and then we're going to hit Finished. So now we just created the virtual environment, and then from there we want to click Start, and then right click again and click Connect. And then here you can see we have Kali. We can go from a live or install graphics. Let's try installing with the graphics and see how it works. This is my first time installing Kali in the Microsoft Hyper-V. So we'll see how it all works out together. Again, just like every typical OS, it's going to ask you for a language setup, country, keyboard layout, and then from there it's going to run the install. And there we go. Now it's configured for DHCP. Here's where we're going to give it a name. Again, you can choose however you want to name it. So I'm just going to choose Kali-Lu just because I'm making this in an environment where there's multiple Kali machines that I want to be able to separate which one is mine. And then if we're joining it to a domain, we could add it in there. It's not mandatory, so we can hit continue. Here, we're going to set up the root password. So again, set up a password that's, because if you're doing this as a test, don't make a complicated password. Make it easy for yourself to remember. If you were using this like in a production environment, then definitely use a difficult password. So now we're going to select your time zone. And then from there, now we're going to partition the drive, so you can either choose to let it do it or use the entire disk and set up LVMs. If you're not very good with LVMs, I would just go with the first choice. Now, if you want to set up encryption, well, then I would go with the third choice. But if you're just learning and you're not worried about keeping this for long term, I would definitely use just the entire disk. If you were planning to use this bare metal on a laptop, I would use the encryption, just because if you lose the drive, you lose all your data. And then here, they're just showing how much storage you have. And then I'm just going to keep it all one partition. You can make it separate partitions. Back in the old days, it used to be carved up in multiple partitions. But if you're a noob, or someone new to this, as they would say, go with the one partition. I prefer that myself. So here's just showing you exactly how it's going to look. You got a primary partition, you got a logical partition, which is the swap partition. This ext4, that's a Linux partition or volume. So if you're very familiar with Windows, it's NTFS or FAT, depending on, mainly NTFS. And then here it's just saying yes, you agree to, have the drive changed. If we're doing it in a virtual, of course, there's nothing else on it, so it's not a big deal. So now we're essentially now doing the install process. We're copying all the files. The drive's been partitioned, copying all the files that makes up this operating system. And then it looks like it's finished the next step. So here we're being asked for a network mirror to be used as supplemental software included in the CD-ROM. So what this means, it's going to connect, it's going to use your network connection to the internet and basically do an upgrade. So here it's going to ask you for additional addresses. So we're going to back out and say no, because if you don't necessarily have that information there, you don't want to go through it. So we can do an upgrade afterwards. So now we're installing Grub, which is a bootloader for Linux. And we're going to say sure. Select our drive. And then here we can see that the installation is finished. We're going to hit continue. All right. Looks like we got ourselves almost done. There we go. It's important to remember your username and password. And voila. We now just successfully installed Kali Linux. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.